In a Fairfax County Democratic primary in 2019, voters had two names on their ballot for Commonwealth's attorney. The first name was Raymond Morrow, 36 years as a prosecutor in that county. He had walked into every courtroom in Fairfax, handled every category of violent crime: homicide, rape, armed robbery. He was the kind of career prosecutor who didn't need to be told how to read a police report because he'd read 10,000 of them. The second name was Steve Descano. He had handled federal tax fraud cases. The one criminal trial he prosecuted, a judge reversed the conviction because, Morrow would later say, Descano lied in his closing argument. No homicide experience, no sex crimes experience, no violent crime experience of any kind. But Steve Descano had something Raymond Morrow didn't. He had $1,153 from a single out-of-state political action committee funded entirely by George Soros. And in a low-turnout primary where most voters weren't paying attention, $600,000 from a New York billionaire was enough. 1,500 votes. That's the margin. Descano won by 1,500 votes in a county of 1.2 million people. He became Fairfax County's chief prosecutor, the man responsible for deciding who gets charged, who gets a plea deal, and who goes free. And his first major policy move was to write down, in the official charging guidelines of his office, a promise that would define every decision his prosecutors made for the next 6 years. But there's something buried in that charging policy. One sentence that explains how a man with 30 arrests ended up free to kill a woman at a bus stop. And it's the sentence Tom McClintock read back to Descano, to his face, in front of the country. Here's what Steve Descano told voters he'd do if they made him their chief prosecutor. Wherever possible, he promised, he would take immigration consequences into account when making charging and plea decisions. He argued that if two people commit the same crime, but only one faces deportation as a consequence, that's what he called a perversion of justice. His argument was that illegal aliens shouldn't face harsher outcomes than American citizens just because they could be deported. That was his promise. That was the deal he cut with Fairfax County voters. And here's what that promise looked like once it was written into official office policy in December 2020. His plea bargaining guidelines, the document governing every charging and plea decision in Fairfax County, instructed his prosecutors to consider the collateral immigration consequences of the specific crime the defendant is charged with, and to weigh the detrimental impact the deportation removal has on the families and communities of defendants. Read that again. Consider the detrimental impact deportation would have on the defendant's family and community. December 2020. Written down, signed. Every assistant Commonwealth's attorney in Fairfax County received this instruction. And here's what's missing from that language, because this is the part nobody covered at the time. Look at who that policy protects: the defendant's family and community. Now go back and look for any line in that document about the impact on victims, about the family of the person who was robbed or stabbed or worse. You won't find it. Not one sentence about victims, not one word. That asymmetry, what gets weighed and what doesn't, is the engine that drove 6 years of decisions in Fairfax County's courthouse. 6 years, dozens of cases, serious felonies that became misdemeanors, dangerous men who walked free. And when Congress started looking into what those 6 years produced, Descano did something that tells you exactly what he knew about what he'd been doing. He quietly deleted the campaign promises from his campaign website. The same promises he had been fulfilling every day for 6 years. Gone. But the policy itself remained. Still active, still in place, still instructing his prosecutors. Because removing something from a website is easier than explaining to a congressional committee what it produced. But the track record that policy created, case by case, is not something you can just delete. Because here's what Descano's policy produced when his prosecutors followed it. The case of Hiram Baquedano Rodriguez, a Honduran national who had already been caught and released by immigration courts during the Biden administration. He surfaces in Annandale, Virginia. Fairfax County Police obtain a warrant charging him with attempted murder, rape, robbery, crimes carrying a maximum of 20 years. His case lands at Descano's office. Within weeks, the office reduces the burglary charge to a misdemeanor, capped at 12 months, reduces the abduction charge to a lower degree, capped at 10 years, then offers a plea deal with a total sentence cap of 2 years. 2 years. For a man who allegedly yanked a 4-year-old girl out of her bed with the intent to harm her. A judge looked at that deal and rejected it. And here's what you need to know about that judge. This was not a conservative, not a Trump appointee. Congressman Knott stated it explicitly in the hearing. This was not a right-wing judge. The judge had been appointed by then-Governor Mark Warner, a Democratic senator today. A Democratic-appointed judge looking at Steve Descano's plea deal said it did not remotely reflect the magnitude of the defendant's misconduct. That's a Democrat saying Descano's deal was too soft to defend in a courtroom. The case didn't end with a conviction. ICE eventually arrested Baquedano Rodriguez after Descano's prosecution collapsed. And at the congressional hearing on May 14th, Tom McClintock asked Descano directly about this case. Did his office notify ICE when this man was released? Descano's answer was 5 words. We did not call ICE. And McClintock's reply was 11. The 4-year-old's mother had to call to get him out of your community. But the Baquedano Rodriguez case isn't even the reason this hearing was called. The reason is a pattern, where 3 of Fairfax County's 7 homicides last year were committed by illegal aliens who could have been deported. And the most documented, most warned about case in that pattern involves a man whose file was sent to Descano's office 3 separate times with one clear message. Abdul Jallo, Sierra Leone national, in the United States illegally. Between January 2023 and February 2026 alone, he was in Fairfax County custody at least 18 times. His arrest record included trespass, drug possession, theft, larceny, malicious wounding, sexual assault, more than 30 charges total across his time in Fairfax County. And throughout that time, Fairfax County Police sent written warnings to Steve Descano's office about Abdul Jallo. Not once, not twice. 3 times. 3 separate warnings in writing from officers who had watched this man's record accumulate month after month, charge after charge, release after release. The warning said Jallo had stabbed multiple people and sexually assaulted at least 1 woman. And one of those warnings said something that should have been impossible to ignore. In writing, sent to the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, it was not a question of if, but rather when he will maliciously wound or worse again. Not a question of if, when. Police had already written Stephanie Minter's obituary. They just didn't know her name yet. In 2025, Jallo violated his probation. The appropriate response was to return him to custody. Instead, he was released on his own recognizance. He walked out of the Fairfax County system on nothing more than a promise to appear in court. 3 emails, 3 warnings, 1 message, and the man responsible for prosecuting him let him go. February 23, 2026, Stephanie Minter was standing at a bus stop in Fairfax County. She was 41 years old, a mother. Abdul Jallo allegedly stabbed her to death. 3 months later, her mother Cheryl Minter sat in a congressional hearing room 8 feet from Steve Descano and said this: I am not here for politics. I am here for accountability. I am here because a system failed my daughter. Please do not let her story be ignored. Do not let another family stand where I am standing. And through all of it, Descano sat at the same table and called Fairfax County one of the safest large jurisdictions in the country, bar none. That's his phrase. And the Democrat who had called all of this most precisely, who named it years before Stephanie Minter was killed, quit his party over it, and tried to warn Fairfax County before the first body dropped. That Democrat was Raymond Morak, 36 years as Fairfax County's Commonwealth's attorney. The man Steve Descano defeated in the 2019 primary with $601,000 from George Soros. After losing that primary to a tax fraud lawyer with 1 reversed conviction, Morrow did something extraordinary. He quit the Democratic Party, endorsed the independent candidate, and went on camera with a warning that couldn't have been clearer. Descano is completely unqualified for the office of Commonwealth Attorney. The only case he tried, he disgraced himself when the judge reversed the conviction because he lied in closing argument. This man is not fit to hold office in Fairfax County. He also said, "I've dedicated 36 years of my life to keeping you safe in Fairfax County, and I've never asked for anything. But I love my country, I love this county, and I believe in public safety." Fairfax County didn't listen. Now here is May 14th, 2026. Tom McClintock, chairman of the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Immigration, Integrity, Security, and Enforcement, had Steve Descano's charging policy in his hands. He read it aloud. The document instructed prosecutors to consider the collateral immigration consequences of the specific crime the defendant is charged with and the detrimental impact the deportation removal has on the families and communities of defendants. And then McClintock asked his questions. Are you taking immigration status into account in deciding whether to prosecute accused criminals? Descano could not give a clear answer. The thing that bothered me the most was his evasiveness in answering very simple questions, McClintock said afterward. The four-member committee followed with a letter demanding Descano identify every case in which immigration status affected a charging or plea decision, 27 specific names. He still hasn't provided them, and the reason he can't answer is the same reason he deleted his campaign promises before the hearing started. Virginia's former Attorney General Jason Miyares put it in one sentence. This is not incompetence, it's policy. That's not prosecutorial discretion, it's discrimination. And here are the 3 words in that policy that prove exactly what he meant. 3 words that explain 3 ignored warnings and 1 woman killed at a bus stop. Here are those 3 words: families and communities. That is what Descano's policy instructs his prosecutors to consider. The detrimental impact the deportation removal has on the families and communities of defendants, of the person who committed the crime. Now read the entire policy through again and find the language about the families and communities of victims. Find the sentence about what Jallo's repeated releases did to Cheryl Minter and her daughter. Find the word victim anywhere in those guidelines. It isn't there, not 1 word. The policy Tom McClintock read back to Steve Descano, to his face on national television, instructs prosecutors to weigh the defendant's community while saying nothing about the woman who gets stabbed at a bus stop. Nothing about the 4-year-old pulled from her bed. And Fairfax County Police had told Descano's office in writing 3 times that Jallo was going to hurt or kill someone, not a question of if, when. The policy said protect his community. They released him. He killed Stephanie Minter. And when Congress came to ask why, Descano deleted the promises from his campaign website, but left the policy in place. You now know more about what is written in Steve Descano's charging guidelines than most residents of Fairfax County, and more than most people watching cable news tonight. You know what the policy protects and what it ignores. You know about 3 written police warnings that described a future murder in present tense, and you know that the man holding one of the most powerful prosecution offices in the Washington, D.C. metro area got that office because George Soros wrote a $600,000 check for a primary most people weren't watching, over the explicit warning of the Democrat he replaced. In 2019, Raymond Morrow gave 36 years of his life to that county and said clearly, this man is not fit to hold office. Cheryl Minter traveled to Washington and said it differently. A system failed my daughter. That is the verdict. Drop a comment below. What was the moment in this video where it clicked for you? And if you want the next breakdown the moment it drops, hit subscribe and turn the bell on. Patterns like this don't stop, and neither do we.